After the death of the Aral Sea, the Ile River Delta in southern Balkhash region has become the largest delta ecosystem of Central Asia. The idea of creating the Ile-Balkhash Nature Reserve, also known as the Tiger Reserve, has been under discussion for many years. Scientists, conservationists and politicians agree that the last delta of Central Asia must be preserved for future generations, although it is not known how to achieve it, benefiting also the contemporaries. In this episode, the OutdoorKZ team will go to the Balkhash jungle to gather insights from professionals and locals. Central Asia has been attracting adventurers since the times of Marco Polo. In their notes, medieval mavericks filled this semi-mythical area of the world's end with fantastic creatures and unprecedented miracles and riddles. To this day, this mysterious region attracts Western tourists with its landscapes and biological diversity. Together with the OutdoorKZ permanent TV expedition, you will travel to the most picturesque corners of Central Asia, get acquainted with its flora and fauna, and immerse yourselves in the everyday life and traditions of the people living in the wild. The glaciers of the Tian Shan and Jungarian Alatau give birth to thousands of nice rivulets flowing into Balkhash, Alakol and Saxaul lakes. Since ancient time, this region has been called Jatisu or Semirechye or Seven Rivers in English, which according to one of the versions comes from the seven rivers: Ili, Karatal, Biyen, Aksu, Lepsi, Baskan and Sarkand. In fact, Jatisu has many more rivers than just seven. Another theory of its origin says that in the Kazakh poetic tradition, the figurative meaning of the word seven is many or a lot. So the land of seven rivers can actually mean the land of many rivers. By this, popular wisdom emphasizes the value of water resources in desert and semi-arid regions, which the modern science fully echoes. The bitter experience of the past shows that wetland ecosystems are the most fragile and vulnerable to the threats of poor economic activity. The history of humankind knows multiple examples of people creating problems for themselves with their own hands, turning their land into desert. %80 of the Ile River drain goes to Lake Balkhash. 150 kilometers before its confluence with Balkhash, the river splits into sleeves, forming an enormous triangle of about 800 square kilometers. Historically, people avoided inhabiting the delta. In the days when there were no motorboats, reed beds represented impassable barriers to the region's economic development. Yet during the late Soviet period, the plan system demanded annual growth of agricultural production, and so state farms began building wintering sites within the delta. After transition to market economy, these processes only amplified. In 1969, Arkady Alexandrovich Slutsky, the corresponding member of the Academy of Sciences of the Kazakh SSR and the founder of the Kazakhstan Theology and Game Management School, published an article in the literary newspaper opposing over-regulation of the Ile River drain and development of rice growing in the arid climate of southern Balkhash region. For a long time, the scientist's position was contrary to that of the party's top management and remained in oblivion. Zoologist Altai Zhatkanbayev knows the delta firsthand. Today, thanks to him, we will try to learn as much as possible about the Ile Delta. Prior to that, though, the expedition needs to do the background research. What better place to do that than in the Central Scientific Library, carefully keeping the written materials of the past? The catalogue lists hundreds of items on Balkhash region, and we want only the most well-known of them. Can I get the works of the corresponding member Arkady Alexandrovich Slutsky? For the first time, I came to the delta in 1982. Back then, it was still a real wild land. I would leave my expedition gear covered with tarpaulin for the whole winter. Coming back next year, everything was there, which means that nobody came there for a whole year. In the 80s, after the Aral Sea tragedy, everybody spoke about Balkhash too. Creative intellectuals supported scientists. Here is a magazine of 1989. This is my article, Balkhash region as a wildlife zone. In the late 80s of the last century, the Institute of Zoology had conducted research on creating the Balkhash Region Reserve under the state Ile-Balkhash program. But the financial crisis prevented it, so the issue was postponed for another quarter of the century. Scientists and writers continued to sound the alarm, but establishing a new specially protected nature zone required huge money. We are already almost losing our riparian forests, because young trees are not capable of getting strong. They are all eaten and destroyed by cattle. Fires are also an often thing. We hope that the status of the wildlife reserve will give us a chance to restore these unique ecosystems. The idea of the wildlife reserve came to a new orbit after the endorsement of the Tiger Initiative, supported by leading nature conservation organizations and high-level politicians. The famous actor Leonardo DiCaprio became the project's face. The biofeasibility study on the establishment of the Ile-Balkhash Wildlife Reserve was done within the Wetlands Protection Project. The Forestry and Fauna Committee conducted the traditional feasibility study. The biofeasibility study suggested the reserve to cover the area of about 2 million hectares, but now it reduced to 415,164 hectares. In certain cases, they couldn't resolve land issues. Sometimes it was due to the interests of local residents. In any case, we now have about 415,000 hectares, which is not that much, but this is the actual reserve's area today. Scientists pose a question: how to satisfy our growing needs without threatening the nature? When I came to the Delta for the first time 35 years ago, not more than 100 people lived there in several dozens of primitive straw bale huts. At present, the number of people and permanent buildings in the Delta has grown hundreds, if not thousands of times. Of course, it is a pity that we didn't succeed with the reserve back then, but its establishment today is an encouraging trend. In many countries, tourism has become a resource-efficient alternative to extensive agriculture. Yet, the international experience shows that effective regulation in the form of strict compliance with nature protection laws is still necessary. Otherwise, tourist crowds will turn into wildlife scourge. Wildlife reserve should control recreational pressure and monitor observance of rules.
Когда мы начали подготовку естественно-научного обоснования, то мы столкнулись с такой проблемой, что...
In the beginning of nature scientific feasibility study, we faced the issue of the status of that land. Almost all of it was private property. We wanted to have one big chunk of land, but managed to choose only 2 sites with a total area of 420,000 hectares on the bank of Lake Balkhash, going towards the Lipsi from Karaoy, and the second one in the lower part of the Delta along Joly and Ile creeks.
В нижней и средней части дельты по протокам Joly и Ир.
Whereas the concept of a simple reserve is to preserve a delta by closing access to it to any third persons, a wildlife reserve is all about cooperation among the state, tourists and locals. People have the right to enjoy the wild nature. People also have the right to satisfy their vital needs via natural resources. But they should by no means deprive of these rights the coming generations.
Конечно, универсальных методик охраны природы не существует.
There are no universal conservation models. The successful adaptive practices presented at different conferences, they were all designed by people and not according to some single methodology. Today they often use the phrase, let's keep it reasonable. But when it comes to nature conservation, it's impossible to do anything if you are not fanatic about it. All conservationists are very much passionate about what they do. Stegman, Slutsky, for example. Stegman had lived with his whole family in a mud hut on an island. Can you imagine? Other people had worked with them also. They introduced the muskrat in the Balkhash region. For many decades, muskrat fur trade constituted the backbone of local economy. It was an extremely successful project to be proud of. Except multiple benefits, the Balkhash region didn't get anything else from the muskrat. If the current generation of scientists manages to achieve an even more ambitious goal of introducing the Turan tiger, it will remain in the history textbooks for a long time.
Конечно, в учебниках истории это надолго останется.
Desert climate is sharply continental. At night it's cold, but at noon the sands of Sarıyercik Atırau almost glow with heat. Some people are running along the Bakhanas-Karaoy highway. Who are these odd fellows with something reminding wings behind their backs? They are marathoners, environmentalists, and they are doing a 200-kilometer run to draw public attention to environmental issues of southern Balkhash region. The marathon is heading towards Karaoy. 3 guys and 1 girl are ahead of the rest of the runners. Marat Zilanbayev, a world-class master of sports, is managing the run. He ran across all deserts in the world, and now together with his team he wants to draw attention to Lake Balkhash. The most senior runner is 59 years old and the youngest one is only 14. Karaoy inhabitants are greeting the athletes. For them, this is a rather unusual category of guests, as they are used to people coming here in comfortable cars for fishing, hunting, and simply eating some good food. This group is absolutely different. They are all very slim, fit, and are burning with environmental enthusiasm. The world is gradually changing, and our attitude both towards the nature and ourselves is changing too. District and rural Archimonts, the UN Development Programme and the Ministry of Agriculture organized a public hearing on the creation of the Wildlife Reserve in the local public center. Saken Dilmukamed, press secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, tells the OWL residents about the details of the plan. There are different people in the world. Some of them are called philanthropists. They are wealthy people willing to help nature conservation and donating millions to achieve it. Your work is to actually protect the nature, and this is what people will remember. Desert and semi-desert lands occupy 1/2 of Kazakhstan's area. That is, 50% of our land is arid. Now we have a chance to preserve them by establishing protected nature zones. This wildlife reserve is unique because 30% of its area, or about 115,000 hectares, are absolutely wild, where no man has gone before. The remaining area can be subject to limited economic activity and ecotourism. The wildlife reserve's provisions allow certain opportunities for development. Farmers are asking very important questions. At first, the limits of the wildlife reserve were set 40 to 50 kilometers away from the settlement of Karaoy, and according to the most recent map, they came closer. It's only 10 kilometers away from Karaoy. How significantly will this affect the grazing conditions for local cattle? Many of the locals had heard that they plan to bring tiger into the delta. Such a large predator will need a lot of food. But what if tigers attack local people and cattle? Russian scientists studying the Siberian or Amur tiger in the Far East have calculated that one tiger needs an individual hunting plot of not less than 50,000 hectares and a steady herd of bulls of about 300 heads.
Это все будет не так быстро и с определенными...
It will take some time. We will have to conduct research. Initially, we might keep them in special kennels just to see how they will behave in these conditions. We need to understand whether the tigers will have enough food supply here.
Завезен уссурийский тигр, сможет ли, хватит ли ему кормовой базы.
Discussions and debates in the rural public center were yet to be finished, but the OutdoorKZ team had to depart to see the river delta. The film crew plans to visit several fishing sites as well as reach the wildest corner in the delta. Outside the village, the road comes to an end. The sand road curls between saxaul trees for some time, but soon the landscape changes. Instead of desert, we find ourselves in the land of watering reeds. Here and there we see traces of big fires. Every spring cattle owners burn out old reed around lake coast to freshen up pastures. Sometimes muskrat hunters cause fires too. Sometimes fishermen burn out reed beds to make way to remote lakes. We see several black smoke columns rising on the horizon. Fires still remain the main reason for the contraction of tugai woods and the death of birds during nesting. In order to reach the heart of the Ile Delta, we need to cross 9 wooden bridges. One of them suffered from a recent fire, but is still in good shape.
Когда 30 лет назад мы ездили по этой дороге, здесь не было ни одного моста.
I went on this road 30 years ago, and there was not a single bridge here back then. None of the 9 channels which we'll cross today existed at that time. Where now blue and white lakes are located, we once rode our motorcycles. According to the reports by Kazakhstan Hydrometeorological Service, the annual drain today is 7 cubic kilometers more than in the past. In 1985, Balkhash's water level fell to the critical mark of 340.5 meters on the Baltic scale, and then rose to 342.5 meters in the mid-90s. During the last 10 years, it has been steadily fluctuating between 341 and 342 meters and was the highest in 1998 and 2016. The cyclic nature of water level fluctuations in Balkhash is a proven fact, but it does not cancel anthropogenic threats. Currently the situation is favorable, but if we increase water intake from the Ile River, it can become critical again. Some scientists associate the current water-rich cycle with intensive glacier melting, so it's a question whether to be happy about it or not. While glaciers are melting, Balkhash feels itself good. But if they all melt, it will be bad. The next generation will see it all. The Balkhash area has hundreds of fishing facilities. In theory, they were supposed to be integrated with a tourist cluster established based on the planned wildlife reserve, and of course, within the limits of admissible recreational pressure on the nature. Having arrived at a camping site, the film crew is discussing the prospects for developing tourist business thanks to wildlife reserve. Now that the idea of creating a state wildlife reserve has once again become relevant, we need to take account of the following. The populations of boars, roe deer, pheasants, muskrats and fish are decreasing, but the number of tourists and local residents is only growing.
Уже посчитано, да, сколько изымает из природы,
They have counted it a long time ago, how much fish they withdraw via fishing facilities, how much individual fishermen withdraw, and how much water gateway workers withdraw.
Неправильный, скажем так, работник
It seems to me that the threat coming from a poor gateway operator is the highest. You need to understand that during spawning, water spreads out, and if you close the gate, it just dies out there behind the gate.
Очень много воды разлилось, и потом ее раз прикрыли. И весь этот будущий малек, будущая рыба, она там остается. В 2009-2010 году половодье, все знают, да?
In 2009-2010 we had high water. Everybody knows this. Everything was in water and it stayed there for 2 years. It was impossible to pass. But it was good. It was not fluctuating back and forth. In 2011 there were loads of fish. 2 years were enough. It is proven that tourism doesn't overload the nature. The two main issues are fires and water level. It would be great if we could address both of them thanks to the wildlife reserve. The film crew plans to go to the delta's part which is marked as a wildlife zone on the reserve's map. Valery and his friends agreed to lead the expedition to Lake Minkaman. After that, Altai and Maxim will be on their own. 30 years ago, a young research associate of the Institute of Zoology Altai Zhatkanbayev had arrived in southern Balkhash region to study pelicans. Local fishermen told him that the best place to find a colony was in the Vosmyoka lake system, although reed beds made it almost impossible to get there. For several days, Altai wandered in the water channel labyrinth, but finally did find the necessary island. He put up his tent near a hunter's hut and the island turned into a research base for several years. Altai's works did not go to waste. He collected a lot of valuable material about the largest nesting area of curly and pink pelicans in Eurasia. He spent days, weeks and months in his small boat watching the rare birds. TV guys heard about the young scientist and sent in a film crew specializing in wild nature. Upon arrival, the filming crew spent several months on the island, from early spring and all through summer. The movie that they made was a success. Tens of millions of people watched it. There was one interesting detail in that story. The aforementioned hunter was the father of our operator Maxim. Perhaps those distant events predetermined his career choice. It's really hard to believe that before it was 6 meters deep here. It's hard to find your way among the reed beds. Inundated rivers change quickly. They can form sand tongues, their watercourse may change completely. The current may bring the whole floating island.
Есть поговорка, что скорее реки потекут вспять.
They say rather rivers will start flowing backwards, which means something improbable. Yet we are now on the river that 15 years ago was going in the opposite direction. It's called Chakpak. Now it's floating the other way. The boats just barely made it to Lake Minkaman. Valery and his team accompanied the expedition as far as they could, but now Maxim and Altai will have to move on their own, hoping for their good memory, detailed satellite maps and strong engine. The colony is about 800 to 900 meters westwards from here, but we don't hear anything now. Previously they were so loud that you could hear them 5 kilometers away. The OutdoorKZ team is carefully surveying lake by lake, channel by channel, but the colony is nowhere to be seen.
Вот здесь была точно колония.
It was exactly here. We both agree on the spot, but it's definitely not here now. We see where the nests used to be. You can guess them. Everything has changed. We didn't find the colony but located the island where Altai's camp once stood. The island appeared inhabited. Now a family of white-tailed eagles lives here. Baby birds have already grown up and will soon learn to fly. Wild-tailed or sea eagles are territorial birds. Each married couple has an individual plot several tens of square kilometers in area. We found that Barkhan that was called Vasmyoka or the Eight. 25 years ago there was also a small hut here. These are the artifacts of the Soviet era. The wind's flywheel. We use them on our boats. There was a small hut on this sand dune. There was a row here every time we came. My father would prop up the hut's door with a stick in the fall and would just go. Nobody came here except us. Altai's tent stood exactly here, and we will use the same spot. In its time, the colony around the Vasmyoka island was not the largest one in the area, but it was the largest one of nesting couples. In total, about 5 to 6 colonies of pelicanic forms lived in the delta. Altai is upset that the birds had left the colony. Perhaps it happened due to a fire. He is sure, though, that not everything is lost, and maybe we will still find the place where the birds resettled. I still think that the Ile Delta remains the key place of nesting for 2 pelican species, not only in Kazakhstan but also on the Eurasian continent, due to extensive wetlands. The nearest colony just relocated to some place nearby. Nested pelican colonies, especially pink ones, are very sensitive to disturbance. People should leave vast uninhabited open space for the birds.
Я считаю, что такие места именно
I believe that such key places as the Ile River Delta should be under special protection. No doubt, scientists and filming crews need to come to such places, but mass tourism should be under taboo here. Last century, the Kazakhstan's Wildlife Reserve School was considered one of the best in the former Soviet Union. Today's experts face the task of bringing national conservation up to the international level.
Также считаю, что должна быть своего рода преемственность поколений.
I also think that continuity of generations among wild nature researchers is important. It would be great if new cohorts of wildlife professionals came to these parts. It is important. When outstanding scientists, zoologists, ornithologists and game managers like Arkady Alexandrovich Slutsky or Boris Karlovich Stegman and many others worked here, we were learning from them. Unfortunately, time passes quickly. The time for young and new researchers is coming in connection with the creation of that nature reserve. It is extremely important that the staff of any specially protected zone consisted of young, committed and passionate scientists. Our excursion into the past is coming to an end, and we need to think of the future. Members of the OutdoorKZ team are optimistically looking ahead. The nature regenerates quickly, especially when humans love it and care about it.